Hugo retrieved a pen and began to compose a letter addressed to Vikier. As he wrote, a quiet intensity settled in the room. He understood that Vikier, already a top-ranking graduator, had developed a formidable technique, Fang, a sloppy seventh form. But to refine it fully, to wield it without flaw, Vikier would need to transcend into the realm of the swordmasters. Seated at his desk, sunlight streaming through the window and casting warm lines across the parchment, Hugo continued to write. His pen moved with purpose as he began detailing the journey he had taken to reach the swordmaster realm himself. He recalled vividly the moment he first became a swordmaster not long after Vikier's birth. That memory brought with it the faces of Roxana and Penelope, their presence bittersweet. Their loss had plunged him into grief so deep that the sword became both refuge and obsession. Hugo spent entire days in the training wing, endlessly repeating the same motions. His journey began as a youth, and by the time he reached adulthood, his technique had grown sharper and more deliberate. Yet, even as a top-ranking graduator, the threshold to sword mastery had remained just beyond reach. To cross it, he had to commit everything. Every single day, he swung his sword without pause, each cut driven by emotion, memory, and an unrelenting pursuit of perfection. And then, on the day it finally happened, he gripped his sword so tightly his knuckles turned white. When the breakthrough came, it wasn't with a shout or a clash, but with a quiet realization. He opened his hand, and the sword fell to the ground. He had arrived. Hugo stared at his hands, eyes wide with a growing sense of desperation. Sweat gathered on his brow. His palms were hardened with calluses, crisscrossed with scars, testament to endless hours spent wielding the sword. Yet, despite the relentless training, the ceiling above him remained unbroken. He could not reach the realm of swordmaster regardless of how many times he swung his sword. In search of answers, he turned to the library of 10,000 epistles. It was there, buried within the countless tomes, that he discovered the words of a previous swordmaster, wisdom passed down to distant descendants. The book he found contained not just words, but a faintly glowing magic circle etched into its pages. According to its teachings, to become a graduator, one must discard all emotion, but to become a swordmaster, one must reclaim them. That revelation fractured something within him, his carefully cultivated stoicism. His identity shattered like a mirror struck by steel. He resolved to follow the path described and began to relearn the essence of emotion: happiness, anger, sadness, pleasure. He chased them all with the fervor of a man starved for something intangible. He laughed when he should have been furious, frowned when joy should have touched his face. The effort to artificially induce feelings twisted the natural flow of his expression. He began to lose control. Bit by bit, his personality distorted. What once defined him dissolved into contradiction and confusion. The journey to become a swordmaster became a maze. And the sword could no longer satisfy the emptiness that had taken root within. In a desperate attempt to quench this growing void, he poured himself into the only legacy he could shape, his bloodline. Using his power and influence, he revived the strength of his clan, fathering many children in a bid to expand his reach and power, to create something enduring where fulfillment had eluded him. The image of his children crawling across a field scattered with swords surfaced in Hugo's mind, small, fragile bodies navigating the blade-littered ground as tradition demanded. Following the unyielding rules of the family, he had sent them to the cradle of swords, a trial meant to forge warriors from the moment they could walk. But something unexpected happened in the place he least expected. As Hugo observed from the shoreline alongside the butler and several others, one child suddenly broke away from the rest and hurled himself into the water. Alarm surged through the group. No one knew why a child so young, so unaware of the world, would struggle with such fierce determination, nor why he endured the pain of the icy water flooding his tiny frame. Hugo placed a hand over his chest, startled by the pounding in his heart. His eyes widened as a strange sensation surged through him. Mana began to stir, not from will, but instinct. He was feeling something he hadn't felt in years. A rush of emotions overwhelmed him: happiness of finding talent, anger because he sent such a young life into a cruel place, sadness from injuries on the child and himself, and pleasure from looking forward to this child's future. Those emotions swirled together, overwhelming the cold rationality that had long defined him. Without hesitation, Hugo leapt into the water. He moved through the waves with purpose, seized the child by the foot, and hauled him to safety. That single act, spontaneous, instinctive, and brimming with raw emotion, was his turning point. By the next day, he found out that he finally reached the realm of the swordmaster. Now, in the present, sunlight filtered through the office window as Hugo continued writing the letter to Vikier. His expression was solemn, his pen steady. He included a final truth: becoming a swordmaster and even finding Pomeranian were things he owed to Vikier. The path to mastery, he wrote, was not paved by cold perfection, but by the capacity to feel deeply and live fully through the chaos of emotion. He trusted, without doubt, that Vikier too would find that path. Seir funneled mana into her scythe and swung it with violent force, unleashing a torrent of slashes through the air. Vikier crossed his arms in front of his chest, raising the Beelzebub sword just in time to block the barrage. Sparks flew from the clash, and his eyes widened with surprise. Her strength was formidable. As the battle intensified, Vikir's gaze darkened with rage. Hugo, in this life, had become someone utterly unrecognizable compared to the man he had once known. The bitter realization churned inside him. Across from him, the demon Seir grinned wickedly, her eyes gleaming with malevolence. With a clenched fist, she summoned a massive magic circle beneath her, warping the battlefield with its ominous glow. Vikier, now stripped of the power of the Saintess's power, knew he had to depend on himself now. To survive, to win, he would have to reach the level of swordmaster on his own. Through his own awakening, the circle beneath Seir flared to life, and jagged spikes fashioned from skeletal remains erupted from the ground, striking Vikir's body with brutal precision. His chest tore open as he was flung into the air, blood splattering through his gritted teeth. Pain rippled through him, each breath a torment, just as Hugo had once said. Rage and sorrow burned deep within him. Vikier crashed to the ground, his body skidding and bouncing against the shattered terrain. Seir looked on with delight, her smile wide, her eyes dancing with cruel amusement. To her, he appeared broken, weak, a shadow of his former self. But then her smile faltered, her delight turned to fury. Vikier was still moving, still breathing. And worse, his eyes were not filled with despair. They were glowing with something far more dangerous. Despite his body being torn and bloodied, deep wounds streaking across his limbs and face, Vikier stood tall. His chest rose and fell with strained breaths, but his eyes, burning with unshakable confidence, never wavered. A faint, almost feral smile curled on his lips as he locked his gaze on Seir. Seir, catching that look in his eyes, snarled with fury. Her scythe pulsed with power as she unleashed a storm of slashes. All of her strength poured into the barrage. The air split apart as the blades of mana flew toward Vikier. He barely had a moment to react. Before he could even raise his sword, the slashes were already upon him. His eyes flared in shock as the attack collided with brutal precision, enveloping him in a deafening explosion. Smoke and dust filled the air. Seir planted her scythe into the ground and watched, her expression unreadable, as silence followed the storm. From within the haze, Vikir's body was hurled into the air, his form crumpling with the debris. Blood sprayed from his wounds. One of his legs had been severed, and agony flashed across his face as he gritted his teeth hard enough to crack bone. Pain lanced through him. But even as he bled, something darker, hotter, burned in his core. With what little strength he had left, Vikier pushed off a chunk of shattered rock and activated the seventh technique of Baskerville. His movements were jagged but driven by raw will, propelling himself forward. Rocks scattered beneath his feet as he closed the distance between them. Seir turned, eyes narrowing in disbelief as she saw him charging, still standing, still fighting. Her body tensed, scythe raised, a murderous gleam flickering in her gaze. Vikier roared, fury igniting every fiber of his being, and brought the Beelzebub sword down with all his might. The blade cracked against Seir's skull. But instead of cleaving through, it bounced off with a sharp metallic clang. Her head snapped back, but she remained standing. Confusion gripped him. Questions flooded his mind. Why hadn't it worked? What kind of power was protecting her? But before he could make sense of it, Seir's lips twisted into a smug, arrogant smile. Her expression dripped with disdain. Pathetic. She sneered, her voice laced with venom. Still haven't learned a thing. With a swift, vicious motion, she seized Vikier by the face, her fingers digging into his flesh as she leaned in, her eyes glowing with malice. She taunted him, declaring that it was impossible for someone like him to break through her armor, an invincible shield forged from darkness. Vikier instinctively grabbed her arm, but his grip was weak, trembling. His eyes shimmered with a mix of shock and desperation, while Seir's gleamed with wicked delight. She hurled him to the ground with monstrous force, the impact shattering the terrain and sending shockwaves through the battlefield. "You call that an attack?" she mocked, her voice cold. "You're barely scratching the surface." Without a moment's pause, she dropped to one knee and slammed her hand against Vikir's throat, pinning him to the ground with crushing force. Her body radiated a thick, ominous aura, shadows curling around her like serpents in the dark. Eyes closed and lips tugged into a pleased, sinister smile, she relished the moment. To her, Vikier was already defeated. Seir's grip only tightened, holding him immobile against the cold earth. A magic circle ignited beneath her, pulsing with purple runes that shimmered with dark energy. "So tell me," she whispered, mocking. "Did you really believe Kamu could break free from the demon's contract? That she'd ever wake up and resist me?" Her laughter echoed across the ruins, bitter and triumphant. From the glowing magic circle beneath them, several hands erupted, one of them seizing Vikier by the head. Smoke curled from his nose as a searing rage built within him, but he could do nothing. More hands followed, wrapping tightly around his limbs and torso, locking him in place. In a heartbeat, he was completely immobilized. Seir's eyes gleamed with cruel delight. She rose to her full height, raising one hand toward the sky as though summoning divine judgment. Her lips curled into a grin as she taunted Vikier, daring him to resist what came next. Above them, a second magic circle formed in the sky, pulsing ominously. From its depths, a storm of spectral hands rained down, dozens, then hundreds, striking Vikir's trapped body with devastating force. The sheer power of the impact blasted a crater into the earth, smoke and dust engulfing the battlefield in a thick veil. When the haze cleared, Vikier lay at the center of the crater. One of his arms was gone, and blood spread beneath him in a growing pool. His body was mangled and broken, his flesh torn and soaked in crimson. But even then, he moved. Seir's gaze locked onto him, her expression shifting from triumph to confusion. He was still alive. With a trembling hand, Vikier pushed against the ground. The act of moving, of simply lifting himself, was excruciating. Every breath was a battle. Every motion dragged through pain. Even the healing powers of the salamander could no longer knit his wounds together. His regeneration had reached its limit. And yet he rose. Seir began to approach, her footsteps slow, wary. She stared at him as if trying to determine whether what she was seeing was real. Was this man truly human? Vikier didn't look at her. His gaze was cast downward toward the bloodied ground beneath him. It was hard to even stand up. Vikier couldn't regenerate his body with the swamp marsh salamander's skill. But still, the memory of his embrace with Kamu filled his mind. Remembering that moment, Vikier, despite the agony coursing through him, began to move. He rose unsteadily to his feet, the smoke around them slowly thinning. With only one arm remaining, he drew the Beelzebub sword and started walking forward, every step toward the demon a defiance of death itself. Then, through the lingering haze, Kamu's voice rang out. She called Vikier an idiot, her words biting with affection, saying she hadn't fought her way back just to see that expression on his face. Vikier froze. His bruised, bloodied face turned slowly toward her, his one eye wide with disbelief. For a moment, the battlefield seemed to fall into silence. Seir, too, was stunned. Her eyes flared with confusion and rage, unable to comprehend what was unfolding. Kamu reached up, her hands trembling, not with fear, but resolve, and began peeling away the demon's skin from her face. Her eyes glimmered with clarity and courage. With a soft, determined smile, she told Vikier she had done exactly what he asked. Panic overtook Seir. She shouted, reminding Kamu of the cost. If she resisted the demonic contract, her soul would be shattered beyond repair. But Kamu didn't flinch. Using both hands, she tore away more of the demon's corrupted guise from her face and neck. Her voice rang with steel as she told Seir the truth. She wouldn't last long, not like this. Then, with fire in her eyes, she turned to Vikier and told him to cut Seir into pieces. She added, almost playfully, that if he failed, her neck would just have to become the sheath for his sword. Vikier's gaze dropped to the ground. A breath escaped his lips, a low, tired sigh, but a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Even now, at the edge of death, she still joked like that. She wasn't just surviving. She was fighting with everything she had. At that moment, Vikier understood. She was truly born to be a heroine. And for that, he decided she deserved a perfect score, 100 out of 100. Kamu tore the last of the demon's skin from her neck and stood tall, smiling, the fire of resistance blazing behind her eyes. Vikir's breath was ragged, blood still trickling from the corner of his mouth when Kamu, her voice soft but steady, asked if he finally understood. Her hand reached out to him, trembling but determined, her gaze filled with quiet fire. Show me the man I fell in love with. A flicker of terror crossed Seir's face. The demon sensed it. This moment wasn't going her way. Panic twisted her features, and, in a desperate move, she forcefully reclaimed control of Kamu's body. Behind her, a massive magic circle unfurled like an ominous halo, casting an eerie red glow across the battlefield. They're insane, Seir hissed through gritted teeth, her voice dripping with fury and disbelief. She extended both hands, snarling. Did you really think this would be enough to break my armor? Without waiting for an answer, skeletal tentacles erupted from the magic circle, writhing through the air like cursed serpents, each one aiming straight for Vikier. But Vikier didn't flinch. He unsheathed his blade, its steel glinting with an intense, pulsing mana. The sword began to hum with energy, resonating with his heartbeat. He stepped forward, unwavering, and, in a single breath, he moved. His swings were fluid, deadly, precise. The tentacles were cleaved midair, shredded into harmless fragments before they could reach him. Seir's eyes widened in disbelief. Her confident smirk crumbled into a stunned silence as she watched Vikier walk through the chaos like a storm given form. Then it happened. Vikier's chest began to glow faintly, a warm, radiant light emanating from his heart. Mana surged outward, not wild or violent, but alive. It was no longer just power. It was emotion, raw and untamed. Rage, sorrow, joy, love. It all pulsed through him at once. He understood now what Hugo had meant. The heart wasn't just muscle. It was memory, meaning, and every feeling they had tried to bury. Inside the demon's third eye, Kamu hung in suspension, her arms bound, her vision dark, but she felt him. She knew he hadn't forgotten her. With tears glimmering in her lashes, she lifted her head. A faint stream of light began to pierce through the shadows. Her lips parted in awe as she whispered his name. The demon's third eye was sliced open in a single stroke, and Vikier, bloodied and smiling, knelt before her. His sword rested across his lap as he looked up at Kamu with the gaze of someone who had found something long lost. Kamu's breath caught. Her jaw dropped as the moment washed over her. Vikier wasn't just angry because she'd been hurt. He wasn't only sad because she had to fight alone. He was alive in that moment, because she was there, because this reunion, impossibly, had come to pass. All of those emotions surged into his body like a flood, and his hand gripped his sword tighter as the mana intensified. His eyes burned with elation and, with a cry of determination, he moved. In the blink of an eye, Vikier blurred past Seir, his blade flashing like a falling star. He landed behind her, the battlefield still. Seir gasped. She didn't understand. She couldn't understand. She turned her head, confusion etched across her face as the pain began to ripple through her. Vikier didn't say a word. He simply walked away, his back to her, as his mana erupted inside her like wildfire. And, for the first time, the demon screamed, a raw, guttural sound that echoed across the battlefield as mana burst violently from her body, erupting in chaotic streams in every direction like cracks splitting through a dam. That was the perfected form of the Baskerville's clan 7th technique, performed by a swordmaster.
Thanks for watching the latest part from the voice of Manhwa. Subscribe for more content and don't forget to comment below what you want to see in the future. Like and share for more.